Good evening, friends. My name is Narayanan. I'm going to be your host for today for the second day of Elevate, which is a virtual conference for Changemakers being initiated by Global Action Poverty, which we call as GAP. I'm based out of Mumbai. I've been part of GAP for the last couple of years, coaching primarily social change makers. And today we are going to have three very interesting and very diverse topics with a couple of them from India and one from UK. And all these topics are varied, and I would like each one of you to participate in it, be absolutely focused on the topics that are being discussed, because probably we may not be getting such opportunities again on such varied topics in one single day. So without further ado, I'm just going to introduce to you what are the topics, and then who are these people. So the first topic, which will begin in the next few minutes, or few seconds rather, is on conscious leadership, integrating the feminine and masculine energies, which is by Rukmini Iyer. We will get to her introduction in a bit. And then we have it, the next one is, does your work matter? Using the monitoring and evaluation, that is M&E, to ensure cost-effective, impactful programs. That is by Vishnu Padmanabhan. That's from 6:40 to 7:15. And the final session of the webinar for today is by Mac McKenzie. He's from UK, and he has an organization called Bridge, and he will be talking on legendary leadership lessons and leading the pack. This will be from roughly around 7:20 to 8 p.m., which will close the day on the webinars for today. Couple of ground rules. You will see a chat. You will see on your left-hand side bottom, there is a chat box which can be used for all your questions. Again, independently, depending upon if the presenters want to seek your questions on during the presentation, it's their call, but you always have the option of using the chat box to put across your questions, and towards the Q&A session, which will be towards the end of each of the webinar, you will have the opportunity to listen to some of the questions of yours and the responses from the respective speakers. So since we are starting, say, roughly around 5 to 7 minutes late, I would not take much time here. We go to the next slide, which is on the speaker for the first session. Rukmini, I think you have it in front of you. She is a leadership facilitator, and she has been working as an organizational transformational consultant, over 17 years of work ex across South Asia and Middle East. She runs her own firm in Mumbai, which is called Exalt, and she also has a peace building platform, and I like the title of it, The Womb Tales. She is here to talk about conscious leadership, and I would request Rukmini to take over from here.
Thank you, Narayan. Okay, so while I wait for the presentation to load, hi everyone. I'm based here in Mumbai, and today I'm talking to you from my home. So that's, I guess, one of the perks of working by yourself and being on your own. You get to stay at home, and usually people are coming back from work in peak hours traffic. So today I'm going to be speaking to you about the idea of conscious leadership. Now, my fascination personally with this subject is one, primarily because I work in the area of leadership development with my corporate clients, but also because there's always been this constant quest to marry two things. One, my spiritual journey, the quest to understand what consciousness is about, what the universe is all about, and look at how do I integrate that into my workspace. So this integration in many ways fascinated me and also committed me to the idea of conscious leadership. And along the way, I discovered that there is already a great community around the world that exists that's working on conscious leadership, and including spaces like GAP, who are also working to promote this idea in many ways around the world. So this presentation is going to be for roughly about 20 minutes, which is where I'll introduce the concept to you. I've tried to make it as simple as possible, and I've in a way put in a lot of concepts here, but I'm hoping that as we go along discussing it, it should be clarified by the end of the presentation. So I'll reserve about the first 15 to 20 minutes to present the concept to you, and then we could take up questions at the end. However, while I'm speaking, if there's anything that pops up in terms of a question or a need for clarification, please feel free to type it into the chat window, and I'll take over the answers towards the end of the presentation.
Rukmini, sorry to interrupt. Can you just take over as the presenter? There is a button on the top. You can just click on that.
So now the button on the top says stop presenting. So I think it's.
Oh, okay. So it's already you're already taking it up.
Yeah.
You can access it. Thank you. Sorry for that.
Okay. So as we begin, my invitation to you is to think about leadership not so much as a competency, but as a journey. So traditionally, management theories have spoken about various styles of leadership. We've spoken about it as a skill, as a competency that needs to be developed. And while that is very valid in its own sense, when I'm speaking of the consciousness aspect of leadership, it's not so much a skill that one can master and stay at a certain level, but it's a constant journey. So our leadership, when we talk of it from a consciousness perspective, our leadership evolves as we do, and therefore there's really no end to that journey. So what do we mean by conscious leadership and the journey around it? Is there are two aspects to it. One is, of course, all of us as leaders, and here when I say leader, it doesn't only mean leadership of an organization or an enterprise or a community for that matter, but it begins really with self-leadership. And once self-leadership is in place, then it flows to all areas of our lives quite seamlessly. So when we're speaking of leadership, there is of course an outer journey part of it, in the sense the part of leadership that the world around us witnesses. So the world witnesses the fact that we achieve certain tasks, we overcome hurdles along the way, we build relationships, we heal relationships that are not working so well sometimes. And in the process, we grow from being an innocent, naive person to being a leader, someone that is looked up to by people around us. Along the way, we certainly raise collective consciousness by the impact that we have on people. And when I say raise collective consciousness, it doesn't have to necessarily be through something really groundbreaking or earth-shattering. It could simply be through a simple conversation that we have with a friend or a colleague, and that can shift a lot for that person and for the world around us. And of course, I don't need to say this in the context of GAP particularly, all our endeavors are towards uplifting society around us. So in the outer sense of the journey, all of us as leaders are looking at how can we serve selflessly. On the other hand, there is a parallel inner journey that goes along the way. While we are doing all of these tasks in the outer world, we're also achieving inner growth. I've used the term overcoming neurosis there. So here, when I say neurosis, I don't necessarily mean a mental ailment of any kind, but what I mean is the fact that all of us have our own blocks, our own conflicts. Sometimes we get stuck with certain styles of managing and leading, and that can, if not monitored and managed and chosen consciously, become dysfunctional. So when I say overcoming neurosis, it's about staying aware of what is the manner in which I lead and choose to lead in any moment. And am I doing it in a manner that is aware and out of choice, or am I doing it out of habit? So that's what I mean by overcoming neurosis. In the process, we heal internal schisms, internal conflicts that a lot of us may have. And these conflicts could vary from right from something as practical as how do I focus, or where do I focus my business goals towards, to a certain relationship, whether I hold it or release it, how do I deal with a certain colleague. It could be all varieties of conflicts within us which reflect in the world around us, in our enterprises as well. Along the way, one very important step in the process of self-leadership is the transition from being the victim to the creator, from being a victim of my circumstances, from being in this helpless space, to saying, all right, this is my space, this is my world, and what do I do with it? How do I work with it and make it better? And I'm sure we have very exemplary examples amongst us here today as changemakers in GAP as well. And in this process, we certainly, of course, evolve, we raise our own consciousness. So the inner journey is all about mastering oneself, overcoming our own inner blocks and going along this journey. So it is this journey that I invite you into as we speak about conscious leadership. And as we go along, as I said, we're speaking about leadership as a journey and not so much as a certain style to adopt. So now coming to feminine leadership, and you will hear me use the term feminine leadership a lot in this presentation, and sometimes I may also use it as a synonym to conscious leadership. That does not mean that in any way the masculine aspect of leadership is any less important. Both are equally critical. It's just that to a great extent we are exposed to and educated into masculine leadership to an extent where we've also managed to create a world that is sometimes, and a lot of times in fact, hyper masculine. And that's where there is a crisis of consciousness at this point in time, in that we see businesses around us not really working very well. There is all around the world economic and political crisis, and we are in very many ways questioning leadership around the world. A lot of countries, including India, are questioning political leadership in a big way. And in this context, therefore, feminization of leadership is critical to restore the balance. Now, when I say feminine leadership or feminization of leadership, it is important to clarify here that we're not talking of feminine in the context of biological sex or gender, but inner energies. Psychologically, all of us have both the feminine and the masculine energies within us. Of course, we choose to exercise these energies in different proportions, depending on, one, our social conditioning, and two, on how consciously we've chosen to cultivate each of these energies, and therefore what is it that we choose to exhibit, and what is the kind of balance that we choose to exhibit in. So when I say feminine leadership, therefore, it is as applicable to men as it is to women. So feminization of leadership is critical, one, from the diversity perspective, and a lot of research around the world is speaking about this, the fact that women are indeed good for business because they lend a different perspective, they lend a more holistic view to business from an economic sense, from the point of view of purpose, from the point of view of connecting with consumers and our target audience. And this inclusion is critical for sustainability of business. And of course, around the world, we're also seeing that women are rapidly taking or waking up in some sense and taking critical roles in business. If you look at the numbers, of course, there's still a lot left to be desired. However, I think the process is very much on track. So why is feminine leadership important? It is important because the traditional leadership model is no longer working as well as we'd like it to work. How did we get to the traditional model of leadership? And for that matter, a lot of management theories that some of us must have studied and are also practically using. Most of these leadership models have been derived from the war era, right? So they're designed for combat. So the idea of leadership and managing business is really about, one, surviving, two, defeating the competitor. And therefore, because this is the base of the traditional leadership model, there is a sense of hierarchy that is needed to hold this model together. So therefore, most businesses, traditional businesses that we see around the world, have a very rigid organizational structure. There is a certain protocol that is needed to access the hierarchy up and down the line. And there is a need for standard procedures which cannot be broken, and you're penalized if you try and work around those procedures. And in the process, decision making gets impacted, communication gets impacted, and more often than not, relationships within an organization, within an enterprise, get impacted. So while the good things about this traditional leadership model, which is primarily a masculine model, is that there is a lot of discipline that gets enforced. There is compliance, which is critical from a quality perspective, from a perspective of making sure that things work on time and according to process. The flip side of it is that a lot of times we are asked to make sacrifices which may not necessarily make sense to us emotionally, psychologically, and in terms of aligning with our personal purpose and integrity. And very importantly, a lot of times in traditional leadership model, the belief is that the end justifies the means, and therefore we look to do anything and anything at all which can lead to profits, which can lead to survival. And when there is no purpose beyond profit, that's where an enterprise stops serving the community around us. And the community, of course, includes the consumers of the enterprise, but it also includes other stakeholders, including the employees, the community where the business or the enterprise is based, and of course the participants of the enterprise, which could be the owners and the shareholders and so on. Change in consciousness that's being brought about all over the world, we are moving into a space which is sometimes uncomfortably ambiguous, but that, I guess, is here to stay for a while. We are moving into a space where peer-to-peer networks are becoming more important than one central authority. All of us, of course, have very easy access to information given the availability of internet. Power is getting more and more distributed now, given that a lot of us have access to knowledge and information. Knowledge is no longer as prized a commodity in that its shelf life is zero, and plus the access of it is easy. And therefore, structures in enterprises are moving from being hierarchical to being heterarchical, which means that there are several layers of leadership. And this is a huge area of possibility for all of us, regardless of whether we're leading an enterprise or we're part of somebody else's enterprise. All of us have an opportunity to lead, beginning with ourselves, and then, of course, influence people around us. And therefore, the competencies which were appreciated in traditional leadership, which is about being the boss, being the organization, having power, is now moving, and we are appreciating more and more the role of being a catalyst, somebody who can be a change maker and make things happen, somebody who's a great collaborator and a connector who can use relationships well in a manner that things get going not just for oneself but also for the community. And therefore, how do we inspire people to do this along with us? So leadership, therefore, is shifting from being in the spotlight, from being the hero, to facilitating more heroes. Behind the scenes, leadership is coming up in a big way. So I think this quote in many ways summarizes the crux of feminine leadership, which is that while most leadership models focus on what leaders do and some on how they do it, the key aspect is from where do we do it. So all of us as social entrepreneurs here, as coaches here, as mentors here, from what are we leading? Am I leading to serve? Am I leading for a purpose that is beyond my own gains, but also to benefit the world around me? What is my motivation to lead is, in a way, the base of feminine leadership. So let me get to the core of what feminine leadership is. So while there's a lot to say about this, I've tried to capture it in this one particular slide, and I will, in the next few slides, go on to elaborate very quickly on what each of these capacities mean. So feminine leadership is rooted in the idea of presence, and I will speak more about presence as we go along. And through presence, we continue to develop these three core capacities of wholeness, fluidity, and congruence. Wholeness is the idea, and all of these capacities start with the self. So as a feminine leader, as a conscious leader, it is important that we begin to integrate and develop these qualities within ourselves to start with, and then make sure that these qualities are also transitioned to our teams, to our organizations and enterprises that we lead. So wholeness is the idea of uniting all parts of oneself, and I'll speak a little more about that in just a bit. Fluidity, or another word for that could be flexibility, is about being prepared to deal with a world that is disruptive. We don't really know what technology will change things for us around tomorrow, and therefore how seamlessly can we switch from what is the reality today to what could come up tomorrow? Are we prepared for that degree of bending without breaking? And the third capacity is that of congruence, to be aligned with one's own purpose, to be centered internally as well as externally. Starting with presence. Now, presence in simple terms is a profound state of awareness. It's a state where consciousness flows both internally and externally around us. It's a state of being in constant and conscious contact with one's higher self, if I can use that term, while remaining in the flow with what is the reality around us. So the critical aspects of presence are, one, and this is a very ignored aspect of presence sometimes, that presence begins with our body. And why does it begin with our body is because amongst all the aspects that we have around us, we have, as if we were to consider ourselves as an asset, we have our physical body, we have emotions, we have our mental capabilities, and so on. Among all of these aspects of self, it's the body which is capable of only and only remaining in the present. Our mind can wander. My mind, even as I speak to you now, could probably wander around and think about the future. It could think about the past. Our emotions could also wander. For example, even as I'm speaking to you, I may perhaps be angry about, let's say, something that happened in the morning, or I may be happy about something that happened yesterday. But the body is only true to the present. So as I'm sitting here speaking to you, I am only here and not anywhere else. And therefore, the key to presence is connecting with the body and then monitoring our breath. And when I say monitoring our breath, it doesn't necessarily mean changing it or breathing in a particular manner. Simply being aware of it and trying to be as relaxed, as comfortable as possible. Along the way, look at what practices can we inculcate to clear our minds. And when I say clear our minds, it's not so much about emptying completely of the thoughts, but being in a state of awareness about what the thought is, what emotions are welling up, but at the same time being okay with it, being not hassled by it. In the process, as we become calmer, we also open up to what is the world around us, what's our reality like, without judging it. And along the way, we start developing what is termed as a sensitive sonar, a sensitive, let me put it in a simpler way, a very heightened use of all our senses, our eyes, ears, nose, all our sensory organs. How much information can we pick up from the reality around us? Right? That's a sensitive sonar. And our senses get heightened when we are in a relaxed space, when we are in a space of clear mind, where we are willing to look at what is our reality. We are willing to listen. We are willing to see things around us without judgment. So there are several practices that can help us enhance presence as leaders. Meditation works for some of us, going for a walk, painting, music. There are all kinds of presence practices that one can follow. But my urge to you as leaders would be to look at how regularly can you inculcate any presence practice in your routine on a day-to-day basis, whether it's going for a walk, whether it's listening to music, whether it's simply meditating in some form, perhaps doing some kind of breath work. Whatever that practice is, it's important as a leader to invest in this practice for a few minutes every day to enhance our sensitive sonar. So that's the key to feminine leadership, because the feminine aspect of ourselves starts from the body. It flows from there, the consciousness. Now coming quickly to wholeness and the other two competencies. Wholeness, and there's a lot that can be said about this. By wholeness, what we mean is, are we aware of the fact that there are several parts to us? There is an inner child, there is an inner parent, there's the inner feminine and the masculine. And are we aware of the fact that all of these parts are talking to us, are alive in us at any given point in time? And how integrated are we? How aware are we of all of these parts? There are several ways in which to work at wholeness. One is to look at, one is to explore what is called the idea of internal family systems. I'll type that out for your reference. And there are several articles and videos available online on internal family systems which help us in working through this. And I'd recommend that you look up some of these resources to see how can you work to make sure that you feel more whole. All parts of you, including our own critic, our own appreciator, the part of us that is scared, the part of us that is enthusiastic. How can we address and speak to all of these parts as a leader and not ignore any of them, so that we are very aware of what Carl Jung would, in psychological terms, call the persona. Right? So we know more and more aspect of ourselves. That's the idea of wholeness. The second capability or capacity to develop for conscious leadership is the idea of fluidity. Now, what you see here on the screen is what I've borrowed from the polarity mapping model of Dr. Barry Johnson. So the idea of polarity is that a lot of times, because of our conditioning, we are taught to believe in extremes. Even if we look at the world around us, we look at extremes like material life is better than spiritual life, or vice versa. Long-term orientation is better than short-term, or being individualistic is more important than being socially oriented, the idea of right and wrong, good and bad, that's the idea of polarity. But the world is now calling for that move from being polarized to embracing a paradox, moving to a space where we speak not of either or, but of saying both and, choosing between things to co-holding space for multiple things. And why is this important? Is because overdoing one pole, for example, overdoing the feminine pole, if you're being only a feminine leader and not a masculine leader, that can be counterproductive as well. So if you look at the top left-hand corner of this diagram on the screen, I've spoken of the gifts of the feminine. If we embrace the feminine aspect of our leadership, what is it that we bring to the table? We bring in a lot of empathy, we bring in gentleness, inclusion, we can be nurturing, there's a lot of openness, we trust, and we appreciate vulnerability in self and, of course, in our organizations. However, if we stay at that pole, then we slip down, right? Because we stop being conscious of it. When the femininity of leadership becomes unconscious, it becomes a mindless habit, then the femininity can turn from being useful to being sentimental. So from being empathetic, we become sentimental, we become needy. We can be clingy and therefore dependent. And in the process, our leadership can become really irrational sometimes and unfocused. We move away from our goals. On the other pole, if you look at the gifts of the masculine on the right-hand side, the masculine brings us a lot of clarity. Our own masculine leadership, our energies bring us clarity. There's assertiveness, focus, a sense of direction. We know what our goals are. We know how to structure our activities towards our goals. But if we overdo it, and in very many ways we've overdone this as a world, we become aggressive. There's competition which is ruthless. We can be aggressive to the point of being cruel sometimes and insensitive. And in the process, there can be a lot of emotional and sometimes physical violence. So from a space of embracing our own power and believing our own inner power, we become power hungry, and therefore, and this is something that a lot of our political leadership around the world is already reflecting. So the idea of fluidity is to be able to dance between the top two conscious poles, right? To dance between the gifts of the feminine and the gifts of the masculine, and not slip down to the unconscious feminine and the unconscious masculine, which can be dysfunctional. So that's the idea of fluidity. And how do we do this? We do this by being mindfully aware of which of these traits do we normally tend to exhibit, and are these unconscious, are these conscious, and how do we want to shift? So one way to look at this is you could perhaps draw up your own chart which looks similar to this and captures these four poles, and look at how does your feminine and your masculine play out when you're aware of it and when you're unaware of it. So the unconscious piece could be something that comes to you as a feedback from people around you, your friends, family, and colleagues. And that's an exercise that I find well worth doing from time to time as a leader. And the final capacity that we're speaking about is congruence. Right? And congruence is it's the capacity to be centered, to be authentic, and of course to align being and doing, to align ourselves with our purpose and act in a way that makes sure that our purpose is getting reflected. There are very many ways to find our purpose. I'm sure a lot of us find it intuitively. Some of us may find it through various tools. For example, what you see on the screen is based on this tool called the Enneagram, which you can also look up online. That's the word that I'm typing in, Enneagram. There's a lot of material again online that you can access. And the Enneagram speaks of finding the purpose through these 9 types that are listed there. Right? For example, I'm the kind of a person that lives for something that's beyond me, or my core value is that of nurturing myself and others, or my core value is of renewal, of creativity, and so on. So each of us can find our purpose in different ways. Sometimes we find our purpose in conversation with a friend, or perhaps in the context of GAP, we can also find it in conversation with our coaches here. We can find our purpose simply by intuiting it. We can find it sometimes in the process of working on the field. Sometimes tests like the Enneagram also help us in finding what our purpose is. And then, very importantly, once we've found it, it's very important that we align our work, our physical task, our outer journey of leadership to this purpose, and make sure that the inner and the outer journey is in a way supporting each other and not being different from each other. So that's those are the three capacities of feminine leadership: wholeness, fluidity, and congruence. So an exercise that I would invite you to do later today, when you have time, is to spend a few quick moments outlining and answering these questions for yourself. One is, what's my presence like? How do I cultivate it? What are the practices that I choose to do on a regular basis to cultivate it? How much can I invest in improving and strengthening my presence? The second piece is my power. What do I consider is my power? And I've brought in the word power because in many ways the idea of feminine leadership, the idea of consciousness, is rooted in personal power. So how much do I honor and acknowledge my personal power, my ability to lead myself and to change things for the world around me? And how do I choose to exercise it? Is there more that I can do beyond what I'm already doing? Third one, and an important one at that, is, what's my pleasure? What do I enjoy doing? So while all of these aspects of consciousness and leadership sounds very serious, it's important also to celebrate ourselves as we are doing it. So an important question to ask ourselves is, how do I celebrate myself, my capacities, my achievements, the people around me? How do I make sure that I celebrate every day? And the celebration could simply be about sometimes giving myself the permission to take a nap in the middle of the day if necessary, or to read a book, or perhaps go out with my family, have an appreciative conversation with someone. How is it that I very consciously celebrate myself and the world around me? And lastly, of course, am I clear of my purpose? And how do I live it? How do I intend to continue to live it as I go along? So these are 4 questions that I'll encourage you to answer when you have time for yourself today. So that's that from me on conscious leadership. I'll be happy to take any questions from you if you have any. And you can, of course, also mail me at any point in time on the mail ID that's listed on the screen. And I'll be happy to take it on from there.
Thank you very much, Rukmini. Thanks for a very interesting topic, very intriguing topic. And if there are any questions, we would be happy to post it to Rukmini. And as I was pointing out earlier also, you could we could just put it on the chat, or if you are online, you can ask Rukmini directly now. We just have a couple of minutes because the next speaker is already in. So we would like you to consider the paucity of the time. Thank you.
Okay, so there's a question that I read. How do we cultivate the characteristics in the conscious part? Can it be cultivated by showing more of it? Yes, Vaishnavi. How do we cultivate it is my suggestion would be to begin with presence, because I think that's the key. That's where it all begins. So if we can devote even 5 to 10 minutes of our day, and any time at all during the day, to invest in some form of presence practice, right, where we are by ourselves and doing something that brings us into acute awareness of the body to begin with, and then of our breath, and then what are the thoughts, emotions going on in our mind, simply being observant of it without feeling the need to respond or react to it. And then moving our awareness from that space, from that relaxed space, to simply starting to hear, simply starting to see things around us, noticing the colors in the room around us, or if you're in a garden or someplace, looking at textures, smells, spaces around us. Developing that presence in a way is the first step to consciousness. And once we start doing that on a day-to-day basis, it's a matter of enhancing awareness towards the other three capacities, the idea of wholeness and flexibility and congruence. Those are things that we can start building in a more aware manner. We can even start building them as competencies or skills, if you choose to use that term. Wholeness, for example, can be built in very easily by working with parts of us, right? Inner parts. So a tool like internal family system is a great tool to work on wholeness. The idea of polarity mapping that I earlier shared is a great way to start working on fluidity, practice mapping polarities on a regular basis. Similarly, the idea of congruence could be done through goal setting on a regular basis and reviewing our goals. So yes, there is consistent effort that is needed to become more conscious, and very importantly, there's really no end to this journey. It goes on till the time we are alive.
Good. Thank you for that. Okay, so there is another question on any reference books or media to know more on this leadership concept.
Thank you for that question, Sachin. I'm typing in names of two specific books that I would certainly recommend. One is called Shakti Leadership by Nilima Bhatt and Raj Sisodia, and the other is Conscious Capitalism by John McKee and Raj Sisodia again. Yeah, so both of these are, I find, great books which speak to both of these ideas, the idea of consciousness and the concept of feminine leadership.
Okay, thank you. So Sachin, considering the paucity of time, what I would request you to do on that question of case studies is write to Rukmini separately and seek out what kind of case studies where this can be applied. I'm really sorry, we cannot, push longer because the next guest is here, and yeah, thank you very much, Sachin, for considering that. So thank you very much, Rukmini, for this session. And I mean, there would be people, I think they would be seeking out more information from you, more on a one-on-one separately. Yeah. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Fine. So we move on to the next speaker, and his name is Vishnu Padmanabhan. Vishnu, extremely sorry for the delay from our end. We were just closing on the other speaker. So just to give you a brief about Vishnu, Vishnu is a policy manager of JPAL South Asia, where he supports regional outreach activities to promote evidence-based policy and programming for poverty alleviation. He has worked earlier with TechnoServe, where he helped complete a district-wise agribusiness study of Maharashtra. He moved to Kenya to manage the program transferring agricultural innovations from India to Africa. He has also been associated with PRS Legislative Research, where he provided Indian members of parliament research support on the Indian economy as well as on the finance and energy sectors. I would request Vishnu to take over from here, and if you can can just brief while your presentation is coming up. Yeah, Vishnu, you can. Okay. Vishnu, can you hear me? Hello? Vishnu? Vishnu, can you unmute yourself and
Yes, I can. Can you hear me now?
yes. And
Sorry, guys.
Vishnu, you will have on the top you will have take over as presenter. So my request to you, have you got that on the top of your screen?
I
Take
don't
over.
actually have that. Let me.
Okay, just hold on. Okay.
Now something's loading, I think.
Okay. Okay. So you can take over as presenter.
Okay, sure. So I'll just start. Thanks a lot for the introduction. And so today, as the title suggests, I'm just going to talk very quickly into M&E and monitoring and evaluation, specifically how to sort of think about it to design cost-effective, impactful programs. This is a very important topic because a lot of us are trying to create impact, but it's a lot of the, and we need to think. So we need to think very carefully about so the resources we are deploying, and even though if our intentions are, we might be well intentioned, our programs will not be having the desired impact that we sort of hope for. So it's very M&E is I think critical to sort of understand what is sort of the, if your program is being delivered well and what is the impact. So before I start, I'll just do a brief introduction to JPAL. So JPAL's mission is broadly to reduce poverty by ensuring that policy is informed by scientific evidence. And so the way we do it, the core of our work is through evaluations. So we conduct evaluations to test and sort of improve the effectiveness of programs across sectors, from ranging from agriculture to education to finance to governance. So that is sort of a core of our work. And then we sort of have two other sectors. One is policy. So that's the team I belong to, where the role is basically to take sort of JPAL's results from our work across sectors and use that to sort of help policymakers, practitioners, and other organizations in the sector make better decisions based on sort of what we have found out that works and what works and what doesn't. And the second thing is to work with these same partners to sort of generate new research, basically evaluate new programs to see, identify what works. And then finally, the third part is to scale it up. So if we find an intervention that works in multiple contexts, we work with partners, governments, NGOs to sort of scale this up so that we can reach as many lives as we can. And the final sector and the sort of part of our work is capacity building, where we train practitioners, policymakers on how to sort of conduct evaluations themselves, how to sort of better consume evidence and produce evidence of their own so that they can use that in their own work. And as you can see from this map, we work across the world. Our headquarters are in MIT, but as you can see, also see from the map that our, we have regional offices across the world, but India is by far our sort of most active region, and we have done more than 100 evaluations in different sectors across the country. We are based out of Delhi and Chennai and have regional offices across 10 states in India. So I just want to sort of, I think the best way to start this and just to give you a taste of the importance of evaluation and a taste of what sort of JPAL's work is just to think of a situation. So to provide some context here, just for this example, we're looking at sort of one of the important questions in development is how do you increase enrollment in primary schools for children? So a big concern for a lot of countries, a lot of regions is.
Vishnu, sorry to interrupt. You will have press the button at the top to take over as presenter so that you can move the slides. I'm really sorry for cutting you there.
Yeah? Okay, I thought I was moving amongst my. Okay. Oh, sorry.
Sorry for that. Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, I didn't realize that.
You'll have to just press it. So yeah, this is technology a bit new to all of us. So
yeah, this is the first time I'm doing this as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm on slide. Okay, so I'm on slide 5 now. Is it moving, changing?
Yeah, it is. Okay. You are on $5,000 free school uniforms.
Yes, exactly. So basically, the context here is we're trying to increase enrollment in schools. We want to get more children attending primary school. So there's sort of two ways. And we have two options. One is we can and we have $5,000 to spend. So one, we can spend $5,000 on free school uniforms, or the other is $5,000 on deworming children. So deworming is essentially giving them one of the big constraints in many developing countries is that children have worms. This is an infection in their stomach that prevents them from attending school, and it's also infectious. So it has a sort of very pernicious impact on attendance at schools. So for uniforms, obviously, cost of uniforms can be a barrier for attending school. So we have two potential solutions to a problem of low attendance. Which one would you invest in? So this is where impact evaluations come in. We need sort of evidence to see which is more in a given context, what would make more sense. So I'll just talk about, so basically, like I said, you need to understand the context so in some situations, it might be the health barrier that is preventing children from attending school. In this case, then the deworming option will be the better way to get children into school. But again, we need to know, so for that we need to, and I'll talk a bit about this later, is we need to understand what is the need, design a solution, and then test it to see if it actually works. And in this case, we only have two options, but when you have a lot of different solutions to a particular problem, the decision becomes even more difficult, right? So you could either give them, it could be the potential solution could be sort of midday meals through lunch, for example, giving children free lunch at schools, scholarships, providing better classroom materials. So these are a range of solutions, and we need to find out sort of, if you want to increase school attendance, what is sort of the most effective way to do this, and that's exactly where impact evaluations come in. So essentially, that's what JPAL does. So we have done rigorous evaluations of these. In this case, we've done evaluations of sort of looking at sort of what is the impact of giving information to children on sort of the returns of education, like telling them that how they'd benefit from attending school through sort of increased income later on. And we find that to be extremely effective in Madagascar. Similarly, deworming in Kenya has been proven to be very effective in terms of increasing the number of additional years children go to school. So this graph just also stresses the point of another thing, that we need to look at the cost effectiveness of interventions. So by cost effectiveness, we want to know sort of for each intervention that we think of comes up with a cost, and for that cost, how much return do we get? And here, since we're concerned about student attendance, we're looking at additional years of student attendance. So here we can see the most powerful way to increase student attendance is through providing information returns, because for every $100 spent on information return, providing this information, you get sort of 40 years of additional schooling. So this I just went through an example to show sort of a taste of why impact evaluations are important and what is this sort of work JPAL does. So now I'll just try and make it more relevant for all of you, and how you can think about your programs and about how we can incorporate M&E, monitoring and evaluation, in your program design. So let's just start sort of from the basic, the life cycle of a program, business, intervention, whatever you want to call it. It starts with sort of conceptualizing and designing the intervention. And so to do that, you need to do a needs assessment, identify the problem, and then come up with a solution. So we call this theory of change. Sort of how does your solution map onto the problem, and how did it solve it? And for a lot of you, this is all sort of already inbuilt in your thinking, right? But I think it can be very useful to sort of break it down so you understand exactly where. And when you break down a program, you can see exactly where it's the program, if it's not working, where it's not working. So I think that's why it's very important to sort of break it down like this. And the next stage of the program is program implementation. So this is basically seeing if the program is being implemented well, if it's the sort of program that needs to be delivering goods to someone, are the goods being delivered, are the services being delivered? So that is where sort of the monitoring comes in, and I'll talk more about all of this later. And then finally is assessing the impact of the program. Does your program make a difference? So that's ultimately what we really care about, right? In this space, we want to know if the work we're doing is actually creating the difference that we hope it is. So I'll just talk about all of this, and broadly, that's what when we say M&E, we mean the entire process from designing the program to implementing it to sort of evaluating the impact. So it's something that we need to be thinking at the outset. So not something we want to do after the program while you're midway through it. We should be thinking about M&E as something that happens continuously at the start, as soon as you start thinking about the design. So I'll just go quickly through the first section because I think this is fairly intuitive and all of you are familiar with it, but this is just sort of needs assessment. This first is identifying, the first step of any sort of program design is identifying the program. So basically here you set the context for the proposed program or intervention. So first, we need to identify the problem. So in this case, we are talking about enrollment in schools, if it's low, and what groups in the population that should be targeted, who needs this program the most. Here it's poor children. And if you're talking about, in this case, we'll be talking about deworming. So this is where children aren't attending school. If you feel the problem is children aren't attending school because they have these worm infections, then deworming is a solution. And that the poor children right now don't have an opportunity to get dewormed. Hence, we are coming up with this program. But obviously, if the answers to these questions are different, you may not want to go ahead with the program, right? If worms are not the barrier for children attending schools in the area you're working in, then you may not want to design this. So this is all fairly straightforward, but this is how usually we like to think about sort of program design. Following which is theory of change. So this is essentially how we have identified the problem and now how do we fix it. So essentially what we're doing here is mapping the solution to the root cause of a problem. So some of the key questions we need to ask here are sort of what are the prerequisites that you need to meet sort of the needs that you've identified in the previous stage? What are the sort of barriers that have created the need, right? So in this case, we're saying, okay, there's a health issue here, poor health caused by worms is preventing children from attending schools. And how does deworming, our proposed solution, bring about this change? So the useful way to think about it is sort of identify a causal pathway. So just to so we are saying children are sick with worms and are too sick to attend school. Then we are saying children are now administered cheap deworming pills. They consume these pills, they are dewormed and they feel better. And now they return to school. So this is sort of what we call a causal pathway, and this is what we expect to happen. So once we've sort of thought about this is exactly how we want to happen, now we have to go to the next stage, which is essentially implementing the program. So this is what we call sort of process evaluation. You can also call it monitoring, and I'll talk a bit about how this is done. So essentially what we're trying when the program is being implemented, we want to make sure that the solution is being delivered as planned. So also this means asking questions like, are basic tasks being completed? In this scenario, we are talking about are pills being delivered to the schools? Then is the intervention reaching the target or population at the appropriate time, right? So here we're looking at children. We need children to consume these deworming pills. Are they consuming them in time? And is it being completed in a way that is sort of done efficiently and to the beneficiary's satisfaction? Are the children actually consuming the pills? Are they not? Are they? Because the whole thing, going back to the theory of change, the whole thing hinges on children consuming the pills for the health outcomes to improve and then attendance to improve. So process evaluation monitoring just essentially is ensuring that the program is being delivered as you had planned it to be delivered. And then finally, now that as we assume, okay, we have done the needs assessment, we've come up with a solution, and the solution has been delivered well. Now we need to know if this was actually the right solution, right? So if the solution was delivered, then you need to have a sort of created an impact on the outcome of interest. So in this case, it is sort of attendance at school. But how do we identify what is the impact of the program? So I'll spend the most of my time on talking about this because this, I think, critical when we are thinking about anything we are doing, and anything we're doing that's trying to make a difference. So when we talk about, just to step back a bit and sort of get some definitions, when we talk about causal impact of a program, essentially what we mean is what happens with the program compared to what would have happened without the program. Exactly. So the difference between what happens with the program and what happened without the program is essentially the impact, right? So what would have happened without the program is what we call counterfactual. So essentially this is a hypothetical situation where people who didn't get the program, what would have been if they hadn't got the program, what would have been the outcomes? So essentially the difference between that and what they actually got with the program is what we call the impact. So a useful way to think about this is sort of just imagine, sorry, there's no axis here, I forgot the labels, but imagine the y-axis is attendance at school and x-axis is time. So as time increases, you see child attendance, school attendance increases, and there's a sort of pickup where the program starts. So intuitively, you might look at this and think, okay, it seems like the program is working, right? But we don't know if this pickup that starts at the red line is because of the program or because of something else. So this is where we need to know the counterfactual. What would have happened if the program hadn't been there? So that's where, so the blue line here is the counterfactual. So suppose we know that if without the program, if the attendance had followed the line, then we can tell the impact is the difference between the yellow line and the yellow line and the blue line. So that's the blue line is what would have happened had there been no program. The yellow line is the sort of after the program is what happened with the program. So the difference between the two is the impact. So in another scenario where there could be a negative impact would be here. So here, if you again look, it's the same thing. We might initially look at this graph and say, oh, look, after the program, the yellow line really picks up and attendance is really improving. So there has been an impact. But then if you look at the counterfactual, so the blue line is what would have happened. What would have happened with without the program. So in this case, the blue line is actually above the yellow line. So the program has actually had a negative impact, because essentially if there's no program, the outcome would have been higher than when there is a program. So there's actually a negative impact. Sorry, Narayan has asked a question. When do you do a counterfactual assessment? Okay, I'll just sort of explain that in the next couple of slides.
I just put it as a question, so don't bother. You can answer.
Hopefully, I'm hoping the next two slides will answer that.
Okay.
So here's another sort of final scenario. Here you might think, okay, after the program starts, the attendance falls as time goes on. So you might think, okay, the program has had a negative impact. But here, if we have the counterfactual, we look at the counterfactual, the program has actually had a positive impact, because without the program, the attendance would have been even lower than with the program. So again, the difference between those two, the blue line and the yellow line, is the impact, and here is actually positive. So essentially, the whole point here is that we need to know what the blue line is. We need to know what the counterfactual is. So i.e. that what would have happened without the program. But the big challenge is we don't know what this is, right? We cannot observe. Once you give someone a program, so we can't do time travel and see what would have happened if they didn't get the program. So the whole point, and this is sort of central to a lot of what the work we do in economics and in sort of statistics, is we try to mimic the counterfactual. So we try to sort of figure out, create a group of that actually we can say, okay, this is what would have happened without the program, and we have to try and sort of construct this. So there are ways to do this. So what typically happens is we try and select a comparison group to provide the counterfactual. So essentially what we want to do is, say we give this program to say around 250 schools, say the deworming program. So we want to improve child attendance in 250 schools. So in catchment area of 250 schools, we give them the program, the pills, and then we want to sort of compare it with another sort of group which is sort of identical to the group which gets the pills, and the only difference being that one group gets the pills, one group doesn't, and then you can look at sort of the outcomes before and after, and then you can say the only difference, if the attendance increases in one because of the pills, then you can say the only difference between the two groups was the fact that they got the pills. So then we can say that was the impact. So because, like I say, you can attribute the differences in outcomes between the participants and the comparison groups, and not to any other factors, because they're identical. So, but how, and this is the central sort of underlying logic of any impact evaluation. A good impact evaluation creates a very good comparison group, which is almost identical to the group that gets the treatment or program. So how do we do this? So in JPAL, the way we do our evaluations, we do something called a randomized evaluations. So what essentially happens is, before the program starts, eligible individuals are sort of randomly assigned to two groups. One group gets the treatment, which is the intervention, and the other group gets gets the status quo, so they don't get anything. So in the case of deworming, we'll select a group of schools randomly to get the deworming pills, and not get the dopamine pills and operate as per normal. And because we do it randomly, they are statistically identical. So on things like average level of income of the children's families attending the school, on terms of sort of teacher qualifications of the schools, in terms of sort of geography location, because we selected it randomly from a large population, on average they should be identical. And then we compare the outcomes between the treatment, so where the group that gets the pills versus the group that doesn't get the pills, and then any difference between the groups that can be attributed to the program. So this is essentially how they do also by it's also called randomized controlled trials, and this is essentially what they do in health as well, to identify sort of the effect of drugs and what is the impact of drugs. They do a very similar thing. A group, they randomly select two groups. One group will get the drug, another group will get a placebo, and then they look at the impact between sort of the health indicators between the two groups to see what is the impact of the drug or the medicine. So this is the same logic. So this we just applying it on a larger scale to social programs and sort of interventions in the sector to see what really works. So the caveat here is doing a randomized evaluation can be challenging. You may not, there are many reasons why it may not be possible, because you may not be able to do this sort of random assignment by lottery, for one. You may not have a large enough sample. There might be other logistics, administrative reasons, financial reasons that you may not be able to conduct this evaluation. So in the absence of that, there are other methods of evaluation. And again, all these methods of evaluations are trying to create this counterfactual, this comparison group, essentially. So you can do a difference in difference, where essentially you sort of measure change over time of a program's participants to the change over time of non-participants, and then you look at sort of the difference in the changes between the two. So you look at the two trends and then look at the difference between the two trends to get sort of an estimated impact. Then there's a regular regression, multivariate regressions, where you sort of run a regression analysis and you try to control for different factors. So for example, in deworming pills, you might try to sort of control for, statistically, you try to control by running models, you should try and control for a children's sort of family income, background, sort of the sort of location of the school. But the problem with this is that you can't control for everything, right? There might be some other factor that might be influencing sort of child attendance rather than the intervention, in this case, the pills. And then finally, there's something called statistical matching, where you sort of take, okay, you'll take one school and look at the features of that school, and then you find another school which is very similar, and then give one school the pill, and then you do this across a range of schools, and then try and find out sort of what the impact of the pills are. So all these other methods exist. Each has sort of their own strengths and weaknesses, and I won't go into too many details, but I'm happy to answer any questions later or over email. And I've like at the last slide, I put in some resources where you can read more about all of this. So the final thing I thought I'd end with is sort of looking at just to reiterate the difference between monitoring and evaluation, because M&E is broadly spoken about in sort of together as a catch-all term, but essentially they are equally critical for program design and implementation, but they do serve two different purposes. So monitoring, as I said, is sort of done on a routine basis, basically to find out if the intervention is running as per the plan. Are you making progress towards your stated objectives? And it's typically self-reported, the implementing organization is doing this. So if you're implementing a program, you want to know if your sort of program is being delivered well. So essentially the big question here is, are we doing things right? Second is evaluation, where it's usually sort of done after a year or in between, sort of after, like, it's a one-time sort of event where you're looking at, has the project met the outcome goals, and like by how much, and you're trying to quantify the impact it has created. And it's a lot of the times it's done by an independent evaluator. And essentially here the question is, did we do the right things? Did the things the program we delivered, did it create the impact that we wanted? And it's like I said, both are critical for better program delivery. And finally, I just want to end with, so these are some of the resources. I don't know if you can click on these, but these are like links to our JPAL's website, which goes through everything I did in much more detail, and these are a couple of books as well. And sorry, I think I went really quickly, but I thought I'd just give you a taste of sort of monitoring and evaluation, and then we'll have more time for questions and sort of see how this can be applied to your work. So I'll just stop there now.
Thank you very much, Vishnu. I think you you kind of made the entire time factor very well controlled, and there is still good time for us for taking few questions. So over to the participants. Questions you can either post or you can. Okay, so Vishnu, Vaishnavi is checking if you can go back to the slide wherein you had the links.
Sure.
So participants, any questions on this topic of monitoring versus evaluation from a gap perspective, from your own experience as a change maker? What has been your experience? If there is any challenge that you have found, either from a evaluation perspective or a monitoring perspective, or if you have never ever done it, what are the questions you may have on this subject? Since Vishnu has given us a really good briefing on and comparisons between monitoring and evaluation, this would be the right platform to ask questions which may be relevant to your work, area of work. Okay. So there is somebody, okay. So, Vishnu, question from Sachin Revankar. Any tools available for evaluation?
What do you, so Sachin, what do you mean by tools? Do you mean like statistical softwares or sort of organizations that you would like to know that do evaluations, or?
So he is actually
Typing,
keying in.
yeah.
So just
And
give any software. Just talking of any software.
software. So yeah, so typically the way it works in JPAL, we use a software called, we use two primary software. One is called Survey CTO. So because the way JPAL works, to do this, we typically, so we do the randomization where one group gets the treatment, whatever it is, there's deworming pills, or it's a new type of sort of education program or a health program, and the other group that doesn't. And we start off with a baseline to look at sort of what is the outcome, like what's the status before. Then we do an end line. So we do a bunch of surveys after the program to see what are the outcomes after. So for both of these, sort of designing the surveys and running the surveys, we use a software called Survey CTO. And then we get the data from Survey CTO, and then we sort of analyze it. And for that analysis, we use the statistical software called Stata.
Okay.
So I'll just put that in here. Survey CTO.
Yeah, that would be good if you can just write it down.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot.
And I got, one of the links is broken. I'll just try and get it.
Okay. So there is somebody else. Prashant is kind of keying in some question here. Just give a second. It should be. Prashant's question is, how do we do impact assessment in behavior change programs?
Okay, so yeah, that's a very good question, because sometimes there may not be you're looking at sort of different type of outcomes than, like, say, improved health or improved sort of attendance. So in these cases, you have to think carefully, sort of what is the behavior trying to change, and trying to find a way to measure that behavior. But everything else will be the same, right? So here the challenge is identifying an indicator that captures the outcome of interest. So if you like, Prashna, I'd be curious, so what is the type of behavior change that you are looking at? And then depending on that, everything else is the same. You just need to figure out how do we measure that behavior change. But the entire logic is still the same, that you need to sort of look at sort of the, try and figure out what will happen to people without the behavior change program. How would have they been behaving? So try and measure that. So again, you do this, the principles of evaluation remains the same, but you just have to think about new ways sort of to measure the behavior change. And that will really depend on sort of what the program is you're looking at.
That can also get into more of a psychological thing, right? I mean, when we are talking of behavior change.
Yeah, so a lot of JPAL studies, yeah, we do look at that. So one of we study, we ask, there are sort of now there are standard studies used in psychology where they look at sort of psychometric questions, and so there are a lot of what we call survey instruments that can measure sort of change in psychology and sort of capture these behavioral changes. So basically, we do the same process. We'd have a baseline, we'd conduct the program, we'd have the end line, and at the baseline, we'd ask these set of questions that sort of captures psychology, sort of self-reported well-being and things like that. And after the program, we'll go back to the same respondents and ask these questions again.
Okay. So, any other questions or any other details you want, information that you want on M&E? So we have roughly around a minute before we get in our next speaker, but you are open to ask if there are any other questions. And Vishnu, will it be okay for you to share your contact details so that
that's
any...
the last slide here.
Yeah.
So please feel free to drop me an email if you have any more questions or anything.
Thank you very much for that. So any other questions, friends, before we move on? So it's a thank you from Vaishnavi, and definitely thanks a lot, Vishnu, for taking your time and talking to us on this subject. And and if people have questions, they will come back to you probably on your email ID. Yeah. So thank you very much. Thanks.
Bye.
Yeah. Bye. Okay, so we have one more session to go, and have we got Mac already? Okay. So we have one more speaker, and he will be taking up on some leadership styles and how to build amazing teams. So we are waiting for him to join us. He's joining us, I believe, from the UK. So just give us a couple of minutes on that. Yes, I think he has joined.
Hello, this is Max. Hello,
Hi,
can you
Mac.
hear me?
Yes. So thank you very much, Mac. And we will be taking up, I will just give a brief introduction you to the group, and then you can take up from there. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
And so it's good morning to you, right, Mac, or good afternoon?
It's early afternoon here for me. Thank you so much.
And Mac, a request to you, on the slide that you may be seeing, on the top of it, there is a button to take over as a presenter. So if you don't mind doing that, then the entire control is to you as to how to change the slides and when to change the slides. Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. So, friends, about Mac, just hold on. Let me get back to Mac. Yes, Mac's full name is Mac McKenzie. Mac is the managing director of Bridge and the director of the Bridge Institute. For Bridge, his responsibilities include the P&L, business planning, and the execution of strategy for the Asia Pacific business. He specializes in senior leadership development, executive committee and purpose-led strategy. He has particular interests in issues such as values-led organization, safety, and ethical growth. And now I hand it over to Mac to take ahead the session. Thanks, Mac.
Thank you so much, and it's a great honor to be with you all today. So I'm just going to walk through. So I'll just do a brief introduction in a moment to build on those kind words. But for today, the purpose is to look at three things. One is how do you take people with you? What is the essence of inspiring people to follow you? Second is, what are the range of leadership styles that you have as a leader that you can use? And what are the contexts that the leadership style is most needed so that you can fundamentally increase your range of responses to the challenges that are thrown at you? And finally, we're going to look at what does it take to build amazing teams, and the essence that amazing teams are the core to building and making great impact in the world. So as a brief introduction, we started 27 years ago. Two students at Cambridge noticed the huge, at university in the UK, noticed the huge divide between the disadvantaged and the advantaged in society, and we created a charity called Bridge, which was about the metaphor, it's about connecting the two. And over the years, taken on a number of challenges, but kind of at the core, the skill that we've learned is leadership. And I personally am responsible for Asia Pacific, and we have small little teams in the countries that you can see, and very proud of the organizations that we work with and impact. Also, what's just really important to us is bringing remarkable people together to solve the world's seemingly impossible problems. And just this example just shows a 10-year program that we're working on reducing sexual assaults across Asia, and what we can do to bring government and business and civil society. So hopefully that's enough of an introduction. As I say, we do leadership, culture, and purpose, and today I'm going to be sharing some of our leadership tools and methods and ideas for you to help you be the best you can be. So moving on to, first of all, taking people with you. So I joined the call yesterday, and I noticed a lot of people were doing messaging over the phone. And so I want to just quickly experiment with this. Is what I'd like you to think about is the one person in your life that you have most wanted to follow and be emotionally loyal to. And just quickly write in a few words in the messaging, what did they do? What were their behaviors that made you want to follow them? So if I could just indulge you for 30 seconds and just to write in your message in the messaging box. Does everyone have... Everyone's able to write in there, aren't they? Yeah, perfect. So if you could just think of the person you're most wanted to follow in life and be emotionally loyal to. What were their behaviors? What did they do? I'd just love to get about 6 or 7 samples so that we can just briefly talk about this. So I'm hearing have a vision. They're authentic and courageous. Fantastic. Thank you, Rukmini. They have authenticity. They're great at listening. They build trust. They're authenticity. Your father, thank you, Narayan. Generosity, kindness, calmness in dealing with people. If I could just get a couple more. Patient. And just hear a couple more. Okay, I'll stick with that. And genuine, okay, and dedication to their work. So, thank you. All these people sound incredibly inspiring. What we've found is that the people, no matter what the cultural context or time in history or business, whether it's government or civil society, whatever the leadership issue, is that the people who are the most amazing at getting others to follow them, they follow a pathway, and we call the pathway see, hear, speak. And what it means is I see you means I see you for the human being that you are. So I'm committed to you, I'm generous to you, I'm kind to you. Then they hear, because someone talked about listening, and they are really curious about your world, and they give the message, you make sense to me. And only then do they earn the right to speak. And then that's the space of being genuine, being the space of authentic, saying the truth, and sharing your vision. So the first one came up with being visionary, etc. And what we found and strongly believe just amazing at inspiring others to. They follow this pathway naturally. I see you for who you are, and that means initiating contact, turning up on time, creating rapport, connecting at a deep level, getting into the shoes, and stating purpose. Then the second thing that they do is they ask really good questions. They're really inquisitive. They show they're really listening. They shift their perspectives by what they're hearing, and then only then do they earn the right to speak. And just as a quick survey, just again, if I could do this on the messaging, who are least good at influencing others, where did they go first? See, hear, or speak? So if I could just hear 3 or 4 responses from you all. Think about the person you found least good at influencing and inspiring you. Where did they go first? See, hear, or speak? So thank you, Rukmini. Speak. Okay, let's see if we can continue this trend. Okay, speak but not authentically. Thank you. A couple more coming in. Speak. So this is the essence of this. Every human being has. They speak mostly about themselves. Exactly. Not curious to other people. So every human being is born in the world with a heartfelt need to be seen, heard, and recognized. And we all have it. The moment we're born, we have this need. And it is a profound leadership act to allow other people to have their needs met first before you have your needs. And when things are going well, most of us find that quite easy. But when things are tough and there's emotion and there's difference of opinion, there's conflict, different worldviews, then this is when it becomes absolutely very, very powerful. I see you first. I hear you, you make sense to me, and then and only then do I earn the right to speak. And what I found in life is, in fact, often the way to get to inspire people to follow you is often just to do the see and hear, and sometimes you don't even need to speak, and people will just follow you. So I'll just quickly just get a little show, does that make sense? Does that resonate? Just a couple of responses from you all, and I can then move on. So, yes, very much. Fantastic. Yes, okay. So this is a model, and what I urge, this is a model you can teach to anyone, teach to your teams. We live in sales. We are selling to everyone. We're selling across ourselves. We're selling to our partners, our clients, our investors, philanthropists. We're selling to the government. And if you just learn to get into other people's worlds first before inviting them into yours. I get into other people's worlds first before inviting them into mine. You will be just much more powerful at getting people to follow you. So I'm now going to move on to the next slide. So when we do our leadership programs, we have little tools that sit under see and hear and speak. I wanted to just share this one, this little tool, which is a map that I have memorized. And whenever I meet people, or this is what we teach our leaders, whenever you meet people, what you're trying to do is, in the connecting and the building rapport, is find out the depth of the person. What are they passionate about? What are they fearful about? What are their hopes? What is them? Tell me about your childhood. What are the most defining? Who's the most defining person in your life? Tell me about your family. What experiences happened that really changed you and made you who you are today? What are your talents? And if you can get into a level of conversation that is at this level, you will create such deep levels of rapport. What most of us do is we keep our rapport building to surface level stuff, but don't go very, very deep. And so for me, I just think this is a really powerful map for working out what are the things that really show the depth of someone. I remember I was phoning a new client in the US and asking them, what are your passions in life? And she then just talked for 10 minutes. And the rapport that we had was amazing. So this, again, just as a map, but also what we can do is just print out this. I assume that we'll email these slides around afterwards. But print out this map with your teams and get them just to write words and share the depth of who they are. And you'll find that the connection in your team will be just that much more powerful. So just for a bit of interest, I'd love to just hear if you could, a few people just to write out if you could write, what is something you feel some connection and rapport with all of you? I'd love to hear if you could just write, what is a passion, the thing you're most passionate about in life? Having conversations, get some more just so that I can understand. Having conversations, deep and insightful learnings, value creation. If I could have just a couple more. Learning, helping others to help people in need. Connecting with nature. Let's just take one more and two more people. And just whilst they're typing, for me, my passions in life are helping to do my part to help for a more joyful and more fair participation in life. That I feel very connected, reading yours, connecting with nature, connecting with people, solving real life problems that impact people at the bottom of the pyramid, living my purpose. So just such, you're obviously such a worthy group of people. And I'll keep, when the other last two come in, I'll speak to those. So this is all about, just to summarize, there are two ways to use this. Whenever you meet someone, start questioning the depth of who people are and understanding their fears, their hopes, their passions, their talents, their life-changing experiences, their family, the people that define them in their life. And you will have such an amazing conversation and such a depth of I see you. Or print this out, work with your teams and get your team to fill this out, write a few words, and to spend 5 minutes each sharing the depths of who they are. And thank you for the final one coming in, understanding myself. So that's the first thing that I'm covering, was taking people. The essence of it is see, hear, speak. I get into your world first before inviting you into mine. And then how do I see people? Creating that connection, that rapport, understanding the depths of who someone are, who someone is, what are their fears, their hopes, their passions, their family, their talents. So I'm now going to move briefly onto the second thing, which is just one slide on the different visionaries, the different leadership styles that we have. And there are 6 broad, this is by the work of Daniel Goleman. Some of you may have read his book, Emotional Intelligence. And I won't talk through every row, but what he found is that we have 6 broad leadership styles that we can lead our organizations and our teams and our stakeholders with. And 4 of them are positive and 2 of them are broadly negative, but they can have a time of when to use them. So the negative ones are commanding and pace setting. So the commanding is basically do what I tell you. And in a crisis, in a fire, in a dangerous situation, this is where the leadership style is mostly needed. But if you just have a commanding style over time of do what I tell you, people will broadly want to leave you. The other negative leadership style is pace setting, which Bill Gates was famous for at Microsoft, which is always do it better, do it faster, do it harder, and it works when you've got people around you who are hugely competent and hugely motivated. So the reason that Bill Gates gets away with it is he has surrounded himself over life, either at the Gates Foundation or at Microsoft, with very motivated and admittedly very well paid people and competent people. But you have to use that leadership style quite sparingly. The 4 positive ones are visionary, affiliative, democratic, and coaching. And so the visionary is about when the organization needs a new direction, a new vision, it needs to be inspired by what it's doing, then that's the style that is mostly needed. It's about painting a picture that is desirable, imaginable, possible, and you just want that to make happen. So that's all about mobilizing people. The second positive leadership is called democratic, which is all about I get decisions through consensus. I collaborate. I ask the question, what do you think? And again, it's a hugely inspiring leadership style because it builds consensus. It gets all the employees to provide their wisdom to issues. So again, very, very positive. The third is affiliative, which is all about harmony, connection, And you have this view that people come first. So empathy, building relationships, etc. And this is a very important, especially if you've got any toxicity or rifts in the team, or people feel unseen or unappreciated. This is a really important leadership style, which we call affiliative. And finally, and the fourth really inspiring leadership style is coaching, which is all about helping people be the best they can be, developing others to be the best they can be. And the message of it is, when you coach people, is I really care about you, and that message comes across loud and clear. So just again, a little bit to make it interactive, when you think about your organizational context that you're in now, about the people you're trying to lead and change, what is the style of leadership that you most need to do right now? So I'd just love to see as many responses as possible. What is needed of you now? Rukmini, your organization needs you to be more coaching. Or maybe you're already doing it already. I'm sure you're already doing it already. Coaching. Interesting. A trend so far. Democratic. Thanks, Sachin. Coaching. Let's take a couple more. Just whilst we're waiting, my organization, what they really need me to do right now is to be more visionary and perhaps less democratic. My natural style is affiliative and democratic, and I think what they really need is more visionary and more coaching. So Prashant, you're with me. More visionary, Vishal, more democratic. Being a proper structuring. Okay, perfect. So I'm now going to move on to the third thing. So just to summarize, the first thing that we touched on was taking people with you. The essence of the tool is see, hear, speak, the pathway. I see you for who you are. I connect with you. I hear you. You make sense. And speak, I also make sense too. I get into your world first before inviting you into mine. And we talked about great rapport. And then the second on leadership styles, there's 6 leadership styles, commanding, and pace setting being the more negative ones, and coaching, affiliative, democratic, and visionary leadership being the more positive. So the third thing we're going to do is talk about how do you build amazing teams. And again, just with I'd love to hear just some feedback from you. Could you just tell me, write down one amazing team in the world, and it could be a sports team, a musical team, a cultural team, a government, a business team. But could you just tell me, what do you think are the best teams in the world? Family. So, okay, your family. So I need specific examples. Like Barcelona Football Club, the Indian cricket team. The All Blacks. We just have some examples of some really great teams. Justin Trudeau's cabinet, lovely. We just have a couple of examples. Tata, the German soccer team. Indian defense, is that cricket defense or the defense? How about that? Head held high, absolutely. Tata Group. Okay. Trishan Dralu, the Indian defense, Indian Army. Okay, all right. Okay, Google. Okay. So we've got some good teams. Do you mind if is the Indian? Can I just have a yes or no? Is the Indian cricket team a good team? Yes. Okay, all right, excellent. I want to use the Indian cricket team if that's okay. So could you just quickly just say, what are some of the reasons why the Indian cricket team is such a great team? And we'd love to get your responses to this. Just a few responses. Why is the Indian cricket team so great? What is it about them? Diverse strengths? Proper coordination? collaboration, passionate. 11 out of 125 million. Perfect leader. I've heard about him. Future looking. They have a common goal. Okay, this is fantastic. So I'm just on this model here. This is called the high performing team framework, and what it's the key notion is that great teams have 9 key attributes about them, and we broadly know what those 9 attributes are. So I'll just quickly touch on a few of them. So things like valuing others, so looking like they band together when they need to deliver and practice joint responsibility. So you see valuing others, you see accountability. They're under a lot of pressure to perform. So measurement, they're clear on basically what performance is. Future looking is they've got a strong shared purpose. Competencies could be perfect leader. I'm just going to shift up a bit. Passionate could be around commitment. They go well together could be, again, around about valuing others. And proper coordination could be around common approach. And so what we find is that we all know what great teams are. They have measurement, they have a common approach, they have strong technical skills, they got the right competencies, they learn and they provide regular feedback to each other, they value each other, they're collaborative, they care, they're committed to their objectives, they're passionate about it, but also they've got a shared purpose that they're going for. And what we do with senior teams is we show them this tool, and then we say, don't worry about the blue and the purple. What we say is, look at the outer ring, and you just write it out on a flip chart. We have clear accountabilities. We regularly review our progress. We have good, well-facilitated meetings. So you write all of these attributes on a flip chart, and you say, how much is this statement true 5 out of 5? And so, so if you just think about your team, do you regularly review progress? Do you have good, well-facilitated meetings? Do you have the right skills? And if you don't get 5 out of 5, you then have the conversation to say, what would get us to 5 out of 5? Do we have a shared purpose? Do we have clear accountabilities? And then what we do with teams is that once they're scoring 5 out of 5 on all the yellow, then we then go, okay, let's go to the next level, which deepens, makes it harder statements. We share leadership. We are confident about meeting our challenge. We value our differences. We help each other to learn. And then what we do is then you keep on going until you get 5 out of 5 on that. And then you move into the I don't know what color that is. I'll just call it purple. And then you go, right, what will get us 5 out of 5 on that? So some of the greatest work I've done with teams is, over a year, they found themselves scoring 5 out of 5 on all of these different statements. So you start like an onion, you start on the outside and then go in and in as the statements get harder. So just quickly check and go, does that make sense as a process? You put the statements up on the outer side, and then with your team, you say, how true is this statement out of 5? And if it's not a 5, what would get us to a 5? So just quickly, hearing a couple of people. Powerful process. Thank you. These statements mentioned here are the ones used with team. Oh, yes. So that's a good question. It's these are the. So you use those. We would propose you use these statements. So you just, as I say, you just put the flip charts and you write these statements. So we put quite a lot of thought into what those statements are, and it just helps to have a really good conversation. So thank you. Thanks for all your feedback. So next step is I'm just going to do a couple of perspectives on a deep dive on different aspects of these. So out of these 9, I'm not going to cover all 9 because we haven't got time. But just something about shared purpose. So what we argue about is, and so we do a lot of work with companies, and you've got to be able to define all 3 of these things to you to be the best that you can be. Human beings are, when they have their purpose are just simply amazing. You know, we all know about Maslow's hierarchy of needs and, you know, self-actualization. But also, right down at the bottom, you've got to make money, or if you're an NGO, you've got to make sure you're financially stable. And then also, you need to be the best you can possibly be. So this is just a really simple little pyramid to say, let's define our shared purpose and let's make sure that we're inspired by the difference we're making in the world. Let's make sure we're the best we can possibly be, and let's make sure that we're financially stable. And if you get any of those bits missing, you will either, if you don't have the making money or staying financially stable, you will cease to exist and therefore not be able to be of any purpose to anyone or any use. And if you don't have the top bit about defining how you are going to make a difference to the world and make a positive impact, then the music in every human being that exists will be unplayed, and you won't find the best in everyone. So we're big believers that when people discover the purpose and it's greater than them, then that is when you have an amazing organization. So again, just a process, what you might do is with your team is you just put this on a flip chart and let's define how we're going to make a difference to the world. Let's define how we're going to be the best. Let's define how we're going to stay financially sustainable. So you're saying music in every human being will be unplayed. Yes, so there's a quote about saying that, I can't remember exactly, but it goes something like, we are all born with music inside us, but most of us go to our graves with the music unplayed. And I believe that to be true. And you know, knowing probably the people you're all on this call, you're all people who are playing your music. Undoubtedly. So I'm going to move on to next one. I think I've got 10 minutes left. So this is just a little notion about accountability. And it all starts with conversation. And I remember when I saw this little diagram, which I'll explain in a moment, it then just made total sense. Everything starts with conversation, and what we've found is that there are three types of conversation. The first is called serial monologue, second is called dialogue, and the third is discourse. So serial monologue is when the group are either just talking to the middle of the room with no particular audience, or they're talking to the most senior person in the room, which is demonstrated down at the bottom. And what we find is that sometimes serial monologue is appropriate, but if you have an organization or a team where you're constantly in serial monologue, like the most senior person's talking the most, or one or two voices are doing the most talking, over time you feel totally unaccountable to the team. So I remember I was doing this policy work, it was an education policy work with the British government, and we were launching this new policy, and 20 people, there were policymakers came into the room, and no one listened to each other. People would stand up when they got space, they'd speak. Most people, when they'd spoken, they'd then leave the room and then walk away, and I'd never see them again. And I just felt there was no accountability to this policy. In fact, I noticed that I was in a meeting with a chief minister, and he walked in, spoke, and then walked out again. And again, basically, the impact was there was no accountability within the group. The second big transition is what's called dialogue, where you see people starting to engage, they start agreeing with each other, disagreeing, flagging these sort of different things, decisions gets made, but again, basically, it doesn't feel like we're all in this together. Discourse, the origins of the word discourse means intelligent conversation, and it means everyone is in the conversation. No one's getting missed out, no one's being quiet, we're all part of this together. So if someone is quiet, other people in the group will say, hey, I've noticed you've not said anything. What's your perspective? What's going on for you? So that diagram, I think, whilst it's very simple, if you want accountability in your teams, you need to have discourse, which means everyone is contributing to the conversation. So just a simple concept, but hopefully that makes sense. The third thing is we talked about valuing others and building trust as a key part of this. And again, this is just a very, very simple tool. If you don't have trust in your team, or you have trust issues in a relationship, then basically this is just a very good tool just to sit down and go, where am I breaking trust in this relationship? And so this word braving, these 7 words come from Brené Brown. And she just says, trust is such a big concept. The origins of the word are Norse word. It means, will you be strong for me? But again, it's such a big word. To say to someone, I don't trust you, or I don't feel I can trust you, or I feel there's no trust between us, it's such a big thing. What can you do with that? Whereas what we think is that there are 7 big things that actually make trust. So the first one is boundaries, which is all about, you set boundaries, and you are, as an individual, you say what's okay and what's not okay. And if the boundaries are overstepped, then you hold your boundaries. So this might be about, it opens up a whole load of questions about what is acceptable and what's not acceptable. And I think, especially when we look at what's going on with with Weinstein, etc., I think we've seen, very sadly, millions of examples of where boundaries have been broken all over the world. So people who are fantastic at building trust, they set boundaries, they respect boundaries, and they are willing to say what's okay and not okay. The second thing is reliability, which is all about you do what you say, you turn up to meetings on time. If you say you're going to make a commitment, you see it through. And anytime you miss a deadline or you don't do what you say, then that breaks trust. Accountability is all about you're totally accountable. You can properly apologize if you've fallen short. You can own your mistakes, and you can make amends. So that under accountability is not only I fully own this, but if I fall short, I'm the first to say I went wrong. The fourth bit, which I think is just all over the world a massive issue, is the vault, which is all about you keep information that is not yours to share. So this means not gossiping, this means not speaking badly of others behind their back, and it's also about maintaining total confidence. So I think one of the things I've noticed in the world is often, when we get stressed, we often will speak badly of others, etc., or we may share stories that are not for us to share. So I think that's a big area for us in the world. Integrity is all about choosing courage over comfort, choosing what's right over what is fun, easy, or fast, and living your values, being true to yourself. Non-judgment is being able to speak without judgment, and allow others to speak without judgment. And then finally, generosity is your ability to extend generous interpretation, to see the best in every single person. So I know it's a bit of a long list, but just wanted to hear just a few people, or maybe as many as possible. What is the one bit of where could you increase trust as an individual, as a leader? When you look at that checklist of 7 things, where's the one thing that you would like to work on even better to be the best person you possibly can be? Boundaries. I have to trust myself first. Yes. Non-judgment, boundaries, integrity, non-judgment. Non-judgment and accountability. Thank you, Bina. Non-judgment. Yeah. Yeah, so there's a common thing that often, for those who are writing non-judgment, actually often what sits behind this is extraordinarily high standards. So those of you who've written non-judgment, you may be thinking, you may notice that you've got really, really high standards. And the shadow to having really high standards is often, if people fall short of your standards, then there can often be a place of judgment. So it comes from a very good place, but often can be played out with a shadow. And yes, Sanju, for generosity, having seen the full best in every single person, seeing the positive intention of others, their words, etc. So I'm conscious of time. I've only got 3 minutes left. The last thing that I wanted to do, so I'm doing just a few deep dives. I've done 3 so far on the high-performing team. So the last one is, how do you give really great feedback? And this is a very simple tool. We call it Plus EBI. Vaishnavi is giving. I don't want to. I don't know what break boundaries. I was told to stop at past. But anyway, I'll just go for just a couple more minutes. But thank you so much. So the final thing is is people, how do you give really great feedback? And we have this very, very simple tool called Plus EBI, and it's just a language that we've implemented in many organizations. And the plus is, what is working really well, recognizing what people are doing and saying, amplify this, do this even more. And then the EBI stands for even better if. And it's future focused, it's clarifying what you're expecting someone to do better off. It doesn't have to be connected to the plus. And what we talk about me, us, and it is, it might be how the person could be as an individual even better, how their relationships could be even better, or how they could do the it as their job. And it forces goodwill. And what I've noticed in Asia is often when we give feedback, we miss the plus. We don't give the recognition about what someone's doing well and what to amplify, and we just focus on what's going wrong. And I think it stems from very high standards. It stems from the way that education is done in Asia, and again, the shadow to it is often we focus on what's wrong versus amplifying what's right. So we in Bridge, we call Plus EBI. It's just a tool, and then what we often ask is I might go to my team and say, can you give me Plus EBIs? And then say, can I give you Plus EBIs? And it gives a language for creating really positive feedback. And what's really interesting is that the feedback that is most inspiring for people is the EBI if it's constructed well, because again, the message of it is, I care about you, I want you to be the best you can be. So I'm just noticing some feedback. Can you give one, so I'm just reading some feedback. Plus EBI is such a lovely way of sharing and helping each other improve. Beautiful, this can only happen when is followed. Fantastic. And can you give one example of this? Can you give me, can you say a little bit more? Are you saying, can I give example of what EBI is? How does this work? So let me just give let me just have a little. Let me just say. So is there anyone actually just in the group who thinks that they got Plus EBI? They would like to give me one plus and one EBI, but you have to do the EBI to do this. Anyone feel that they've got this? So the one short plus, and then how could I be even better? Just receiving some feedback. Not the negative. This was the next session. Next session. Okay, allocate more time. Okay, so that's my EBI. So for the next time I do this, have more time so that I can do the job properly. So I'm just going to quickly to summarize to say that's the high performance team framework, and what you do with your team is get 5 out of 5s out of all of these things. I've given you a few tools that sit under how do you create accountability, how do you build value, how do you value each other, build more trust, how do you do feedback and learning, yes, and then how do you get a shared purpose that you all love. And then, so in summary, taking people with you, that was the first thing we covered. See, hear, speak. I get into your world before inviting you into mine. The leadership styles, the 6 styles, what's the leadership style you're most needed, and then how do you build amazing teams, and a diagnostic tool that you can take to your teams. And so I'm just reading something. This was the next session. So organized way you shared info was so great. EBI, a few more examples explaining the concepts would help us understand better. Thank you so much for that feedback. So I'm just going to hand over and just say that's the end of my session, and I don't know if I've got time for Q&A, but if I could, I'd just say it's been a real honor to be with you today, and sorry for turning up 2 minutes late. That would be an EBI as well.
So thank you very much, Mac. I mean, it has been, I think, reading all the chat messages, it has been a wonderful session. Everybody was completely engaged, and that's the reason people asked for more time from you, so that we can really relish what is being delivered here. So thank you very much for
Wonderful.
your time, and I think it was very precise, to the point, and it delivered the way it has to be. So, and you kept us engaged, and that's the best part. I mean, asking survey questions, just to keep us with you throughout this journey. So thank you very much. Thanks a lot.
Fantastic. And as again, I feel totally honored to be with a group of such wonderful people making a difference in the world. So thank you for letting me live my purpose.
Thank you. Thanks, Mac. Thank you. And will it be possible, if anybody has to touch base with you again, will it be possible for you to share? Yeah.
Of course, and make sure we send out the PowerPoints to everyone.
Yes,
So they've
yes. That would be great. If you can do that, that would be very helpful. Yeah. Thank you.
And maybe send my email address, as I see a question on any references. Of course, Sachin, I can help you with references. So if my email address can be shared, I will help any questions. Over to you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. So team, this concludes day 2 of the webinars today. It has been a wonderful session, with each of the speakers having a flair and flavor, I would say, to their entire engagement with us today. So I'm looking forward for the day 3, day 4, and day 5. So thank you very much again on this Tuesday evening. Whatever remains of the evening and night, have a good one at that, and see you tomorrow again at 6 p.m. Thanks a lot.